What's up, everyone? It is Monday, March 17th. I just startled the dog sitting right behind me. Some big moves in the National Football League as the Bengals finally get the deals done with their wide receivers, possibly too with one of their defensive ends. We'll see if it happens next couple of days. That's the reports. And of course, that fired up the old X machine and social media talking about how the Bengals are building their team. I thought I'd throw my couple cents in there, whether you care or not. I know Bengals fans and I don't always get along. Maybe you will after this, maybe you won't, but it's worth discussing. So the Bengals basically ended up paying their two wide receivers a combined $69 million a year. Maybe it's 70, somewhere around there. And the discussion always becomes with them, is this worth the money? Is paying wide receivers worth the money? That is $11 million more than Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and $12 million more than A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Now, obviously, we'll talk about every situation there: Bengals, Dolphins, Browns. Now, from the Bengals' perspective, let's go positives first, okay? One is it keeps this core intact. I talk often about drafting, developing players, and paying those players. So I can't say that Bengals flatly shouldn't do this when I have said for years, I really firmly believe this. We saw it with Philly, we saw it with Kansas City, that drafting, developing your own players is a core principle to having success in the National Football League. So I can't just flatly say I don't like it, because I've talked about in the past that being a way to win in this league, and I firmly believe that. Second, is that the Bengals have been unwilling at times to pay their own players. It takes upfront cash. It takes a commitment in the long term. It takes guaranteed money. So if the culture is changing in Cincinnati to where paying these players that you've drafted developed becomes the norm, this is a great thing for Bengals fans and the Bengals, of course, right? Is that you are able to have these dynamic players, keep them on your roster, and make them long-term Bengals. So from those perspectives, obviously, that's the positive, right? That's what you would say if you're a Bengals fan, as this is why we did it. It's why we should have done it, and it'll help us win. And I saw a tweet, it's absolutely true, from someone I've talked back Bengals for, back and forth today about how the Bengals just don't have a lot of guys to pay. They've drafted and developed, which is a problem unto itself. We'll talk about that in a second. And you're absolutely right? Like, there's a floor minimum. You have to spend the money, and why not spend it on players that you have done everything in your power to grow and nurture, and you want Joe Burrow to be with these wide receivers, and we saw what happened last season with how well Burrow played. Let's keep that train rolling. I get all those things, and they make sense a little bit. Like, I get the logic behind that. The first thing I'll say is this. I know that Joe Burrow advocated for those guys to come back. Said it for a long time now. Players should not be in charge of player personnel decisions. So if you want to make Joe Burrow happy and include him in the discussion, fine. But the hard part about a general manager in the front office is doing things that players do not like. Players don't want their friends cut. Players don't want to see good players leave. But it's the job of a front office to remove the emotion of that decision and make that decision for the betterment of your team. So I just want to make that clear. Like, I don't know in the end if the Bengals actually consulted with Joe Burrow and took it, if they're looking at these contract negotiations, they're saying to themselves, hey, Joe wants these guys back. We must have them back. I don't know if that's there. I just want to make that statement out. I just want to put my opinion out there on this, just generally speaking. Very famously, Patrick Mahomes wanted Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Probably the worst first-round pick the Chiefs have had since they've been winning Super Bowls. Like, just a horrendous pick, right? Now, there's other things that go into that pick not being as good as it could have been. And I know Clyde Edwards-Helaire in mental better space now, but nonetheless, this wasn't a good draft pick, right? And we've seen other players advocate for their friends. How's it working for Aaron Rodgers in New York? It's not, right? It's not at all, right? Now, I understand from a keeping your players happy perspective, including them in very base layer conversations. But anything complex, the player decision, we don't watch film on these guys. Well, we do. We watch film, obviously, like in the season. but we're not watching, like, I don't think Burrow's out there watching college wide receivers or NFL free agents to figure out if T. Higgins is better than another option, right? Like, he's not doing all those things, right? Of course he wants to play with these guys. So I understand Burrow's part of it, but I'll just say the team should never decide based off of what your best player wants. Absolutely not out on that 100% of the time. All right, so let's talk about just from a roster building perspective. Is this a good move for the Bengals long-term future? As I mentioned, there's two other teams that have approached free agency, contract building, team roster, and contracts the way that the Bengals are doing at this position, right? It's Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle in Miami, and A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. Now, I've talked about for weeks now since the Super Bowl why the Eagles won the Super Bowl. They have great players and players under rookie contracts that are fantastic and cheap. The Dolphins have not done that. When you pay so much to one position, especially one that I think it's now a premium position, but really you need one at that position. You don't need two to have success. Now, having two is great, but that means you have to hit home runs on the other players you have drafted to compensate for all that money going to one single position group, right? So the Eagles have done that, and again, they got him cheaper. They paid Devontae Smith sooner, which is the Bengals absolutely should have paid Jamar Chase, I think, 1 year sooner. And T. Higgins, if they want to keep him, they should have kept him earlier, right? You would have got a deal. But now the onus is on the Bengals. You've got to hit home runs on your draft, right? Think about the Eagles again, right? Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, Cooper DeJean, Mitchell, right? You got to hit home runs on these guys now. That's imperative. The Bengals' problem was not offense last season. The Bengals' problem was their defense. So the onus now is really strong in the front office to make sure you draft develop guys. Now, maybe Al Golden comes in there on defense. We saw what he did at Notre Dame, and I do think he's a fantastic coach. He got the most out of the players there. So you have to think the young players. I think the Bengals have spent 8 draft picks the last 2 years on defensive players. I can look that up exactly. But you have to make sure that now Golden gets the most out of these guys. This is only going to, it's not going to, the success of these two contracts are more about what happens on defense than what happens on offense. The Bengals are already good on offense. We know that already. So now it comes down to are the resources allocated, and have they done a good job developing the players on the roster to have success to pair with Burrow? You're not finding Super Bowl champions. That's the goal for the Bengals, to have unbalanced teams, right? You're not finding that. You're finding teams that are very balanced. So, a couple more things here. Let's just say T. Higgins is not there. You've traded T. Higgins away. You release him, whatever. Could you spend that money on 2 or 3 other free agents and find a wide receiver in the draft? Absolutely. Now, that's a risk, right? Because you know what you have in T. Higgins. You don't know what you have in free agents, which sometimes are very hit or miss. Could you go get yourself, let's say, a Warren, the defensive lineman for the Chiefs, who got paid by the Panthers, and Ward, or maybe Carlton Davis, or Mooring, like get a defensive back for the same price you pay T. Higgins? Probably could have done that. I'm asking you, Bengals fans, does that make your team a better team moving forward? Chase, wide receivers you have on the roster, or younger guys, right? And then better players on defense. That's the balance here, right? Is if you say, well, we don't pay T. Higgins, or we traded him, are we using that money to build the defense around Joe Burrow? Also, I think Joe Burrow is great. I know you guys do too, right? Absolutely, you believe Burrow is great. A quarterback of Joe Burrow's stature should be able to have wide receivers that are not a combination of Chase and Higgins and have success. Absolutely, he should be able to. That's part of the equation here, right? Is that, again, let's say the Bengals decided to not to pay Higgins and trade him away and use that money, a couple guys on defense. You should be able to find a wide receiver in the draft that can give you production on offense that it's close to what you've had with these two wide receivers. Playing teams do this. It's not a thing that's uncommon in the NFL. The wide receiver hit rate for non-first round picks might be better at any other position. Running back and wide receiver. A lot of other positions, you have to have premium guys, like high draft picks, defensive line, offensive tackle, quarterback. A lot of times these guys are premium guys. Wide receiver, you find all over the place. You don't have to have a first-round pick to be good at that position. And so I think Burrow could play with guys that are not these two and still be really. And let's say the offense steps back a tiny bit, 5 or 10%. But the defense gets 25% better or 30% better. That, to me, is a better team than no guys on defense or just really young guys on defense and Higgins and Chase. So that's something to consider, right? Because you would say that a good quarterback like Burrow, elite quarterback like Burrow, was able to elevate the talent around him. Josh Allen has done that. Lamar Jackson has done that. Patrick Mahomes has done that. Now, Jalen Hurts, would he be the same guy without those two wide receivers? Probably not. That's why they brought in those two guys. So you have to know what your quarterback talent is. Now, if you're selling me on the idea that Joe Burrow is not in the same level as the three AFC quarterbacks I mentioned, I disagree with you. But that's the argument, and that's why you want to keep those two guys. Fine, but I don't think that's the case, right? Joe Burrow's an ascending quarterback, and those guys tend to lift everyone around him. So I do believe that the Bengals could have gone that direction and said, let's spend the money on defense in free agency because we know Burrow elevates people around him, and we can go and get ourselves a 4th-round wide receiver, 3rd-round wideout, and be maybe not just as good at offense, but just below that. And our defense is so much better. Our offensive line is so much better. Something's better that makes up for the difference on that one. So that's kind of where I've fallen. Like, would I build a team this way? Probably not. I'm also not a general manager. I also have the benefit of rooting for a team that has not built themselves this way and has won Super Bowls that way because they draft and develop at an alarmingly great rate. So does Philly. So that's what it comes down to. When you pay these guys, you have to hit home runs in the draft. It's that simple. This will be graded on that scale, and then obviously the scale of winning Super Bowls, which again in this conference is super hard to do. I've been in the playoffs in 2 years essentially, right? And part of that was Burrow was hurt 2 years ago, but last year they were a Super Bowl team last season, weren't a playoff team last season. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out. Again, the barometer of success will be, in my opinion, how defense plays, not how we know the offense is good. Does the defense play better? Does the risk you take of paying 2 wide receivers this much money end up helping you win a championship? Some of the pushback I saw was that the Chiefs pay a lot of players. They have a high percent of players take up a big percent of their cap. Absolutely true. Who are those players? Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce for 1 more season, Juwan Taylor for 1 more season, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, Jalen Moore, Chris Jones. Then I guess Nick Bolton now counts. So we have quarterback, tight end, right tackle, right guard, center, left tackle, pass rusher, D tackle, and linebacker. That's 5 positions, right? Quarterback, tight end, offensive line, defensive tackle, defensive line, linebacker. 5 positions. So it's not the same, right, as the Bengals right now. The Chiefs right now, their wide receiver room is Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Justin Ross still there. I don't know, Watson's on somewhere else. I don't even know who the receivers are for Kansas City right now. It's not the same thing. And what the Chiefs have done, I think rightfully, is they've decided that we're going to let Mahomes elevate the talent around him, and then we're going to let our front office win those draft picks to make the defense better. And it's ironic because the blueprint for that is trading away your wide receiver and using those draft picks to draft Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis in a given year. So, different ways to build your team. I don't know, like, if it's the wrong way. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I mentioned at the beginning, I get why the Bengals did it. I certainly do. But we'll see what the results are. Again, the Bengals just have a lot of pressure on them to get this right fairly quickly and get the guys on defense playing well. Because right now, look, the Bengals, again, young on defense, right? They have PJ Hill's older, and then it's and Hendrickson comes back, it's older, but then it's it's a 21 guy, it's a 24 guy, a 19, 20, a 23, a 23, a 22, a 22. Like these are the draft years. It's a young defense, and the Bengals it's just that simple. Got to hit home runs to that positions. All right, guys. Hopefully, I provided you many different angles. In the end, whatever, man. I mean, I know Bengals fans are happy. You got to pay someone, but the question is, in the end, I'll finish with this. I want you to answer this question, Bengals fans. Are you better off Joe Burrow, younger wide receiver, paired with Jamar Chase, and then 2 additions on defense in free agency? Are you? Tell me. Let me know. You're listening to Jeff Schwartz. You know where to find me on social media. All right, guys. There's the dog. Look at him. He's just look. Hey, buddy. Hey, boy. All right, guys. Have a good Monday. We're back tomorrow. Take care, everyone.